Welcome, dear students. Today our topic is presidential form of government. This lecture will try to give us understanding of what presidential government is all about. It will try to see how presidential form of government operates in USA. It will also try to focus on the differences between the powers of President of USA and that of India. The presidential system is that form of government where the head of the government also acts as the head of the states. Not only this, but he also leads the executive branch, which is separated from the legislative branch. The United States of America has a presidential system. The legislature may have the right, in rare most cases, to dismiss the executive through impeachment. In the presidential form of government, the executive is led by the president. In this form of government, the president acts both as the head of the state and also as the head of the government. In this form of government, the president takes up the charge in his own capacity rather than acting on the aid and advice of the cabinet, as in the form of parliamentary form of government. The president is elected directly by the people. The president is also the supreme commander of the army and also has the power to carry on the foreign policies. The basic feature of a presidential form of government are: president is the real head, separation of power, ministers are accountable to the president. Now we will discuss the presidential form of government in the USA. This system originated in the United States and is the dominant model followed by just a few other democracies, including Philippines, Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. The President of the United States serves as both the senior executive of the government and the head of the state under the American system. The cabinet and heads of numerous executive departments, as well as other administrative bureaus and agencies, comprises the executive branch of government, is presided over by the president. The chief executive and subordinate executive officers are in charge of carrying out and enforcing legislation, as well as managing the government's day-to-day activities. The president, in particular, controls the armed forces and is responsible for the country's defense against internal instability and external invasion. In the United States, the president, other executive officials, and members of the court can be removed through a constitutionally mandated process of impeachment and conviction. In the United States, the president serves for 4 years, Senate members for 6 years, and House members for 2 years. The legislative or lawmaking branch of the government in the United States is the bicameral Congress, which consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate. In USA, there is a clear separation of powers between the executive and the legislature and the judiciary. A law passed by the Congress can be vetoed by the president. The President of the United States of America is decidedly the most powerful elected executive in the world. The Constitution had declared that the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. The framers of the Constitution intended to make the President the Constitution ruler. But in due course of time, the office has gathered around itself such a plenitude of powers that the American president has become the greatest ruler of the world. He has vast powers. According to Monroe, he exercised the largest amount of authority ever wielded by any man in a democracy. Now, coming to the process of election. The presidency of the United States of America is one of the greatest political offices of the world. As we have already discussed this, he is the chief executive head of the state as well as the head of the administration. The makers of the constitution were very much agitated over the nature of the executive. In their anxiety to establish a free yet limited government, they devised a system of government which came to be known as the presidential system. Their original contribution was to constitutional law. All executive authority is therefore vested in the president. The Constitution provides that a candidate for the office of the president must be a natural-born citizen of the US, not less than 35 years in age, a resident of the United States for at least 14 years. The president is elected for 4 years. So the tenure of president is 4 years. Now coming to the election of the president. So one of the most difficult problems faced by the framers at the Philadelphia was that of choosing the president. Having decided that the head of the state must be elected, the problem before them was to decide how he would be elected. Ultimately, it was decided that the president would be indirectly elected by the people. But the growth of political parties and political practices has set up the method of presidential election. The plan of election as provided in the Constitution is rather simple. The president is elected by an electoral college consisting of the representatives of the states. The people of each state elect presidential electors, members of electoral college, equal to the number of representatives the state has in Congress. No member of the Congress is allowed to be a presidential elector. The presidential electors meet in each state on fixed dates and vote for the president. All the votes are sealed and then sent to the capital of the US. The president of the Senate counts the votes in the presence of members of both the houses of Congress. The candidate who secures majority of the electoral votes cast for the president is declared elected. If no candidate receives a clear majority of the electoral for the president, the members of the House of Representatives choose a president from among the 3 candidates who have received the highest number of electoral votes, and the new president assumes office. Now we will discuss the powers and functions of the US president. The US president is not only the head of the state, but also the head of administration. The Constitution clearly lays down that all executive authority belongs to him. The Constitution enumerates the power of the president. In fact, they are much beyond those contained in the Constitution. Many factors are responsible for the growth of presidential powers, and today many view the extent of these powers as a dangerous trend. In addition, a lot of powers are enumerated in the Constitution. The president has acquired a list of authority by statutes. Congress has lifted the president to a status akin to that of constitutional dictator. The decisions of the Supreme Court usage have only considerably strengthened the position of presidency. The powers of the president may be studied under the following heads. Now, first, we will discuss the executive powers of the president. The executive powers of the American president include the following. He is the chief executive, and it's his duty to see that the laws and treaties are enforced throughout the country. Second, he has the power to make all important appointments, but all such appointments are to be approved by the Senate. As a matter of usage, the Senate does not interfere in the appointments of the secretaries, ambassadors, and other diplomats. Appointment of the judges of the Supreme Court is scrutinized thoroughly by the Senate. The president has the power to remove any person appointed by him. The Senate has no share in the removal of the officers appointed with its own consent. Thus, the president has almost unrestricted power for removing the federal officers. Then, The president has control of foreign relations, which he conducts with the assistance of the Secretary of State. He appoints all ambassadors, consultants, and other diplomatic representatives in foreign countries with the approval of the Senate. Besides, he may send special secret or personal agents without the senatorial approval, who take orders directly from him. The president receives all foreign ambassadors and other diplomatic agents accredited to the United States. He can, if circumstances require, send them home and even break off relations with a certain country. He negotiates treaties with foreign powers, but such treaties must be ratified by a two-thirds majority of the Senate. The Senate can block a treaty that the president has negotiated, but it cannot make treaty or force the president to make one. Though his treaty-making power is subject to ratification by the Senate, he is free to enter into executive agreements without the consent of the Senate. He has the sole power to recognize or refuse to recognize new states. In fact, he is the chief spokesman of the US in international affairs and is directly responsible for the foreign policy of his country and its results. The president is the commander-in-chief of all the three forces. He is responsible for the defense of the country. He appoints officers of the Army, Navy, and Air Force with the consent of the Senate and anybody's approval during a war. He cannot, however, declare war. This power has been entrusted to the Congress, but as the supreme commander of the defense war. Now, coming to the legislative powers of the President of USA. The US Constitution is based on the theory of separation of powers. The executive and the legislative organs of the government are made independent of each other. Hence, the Congress legislates and the President executes. But in practice, the President has become a very important legislator. His legislative powers are as follows. The President can also issue certain executive orders having the force of law. This is known as the ordinance power of the President. Some of the ordinances are issued in pursuance of authority conferred upon him by the Congress. Others are issued to fill the details of laws passed by the Congress. The number of such executive orders is very large. As a result of this, the President has been able to increase his legislative influence tremendously. In recent times, the President of America have used the device of taking the congressional leaders into confidence by holding personal conferences with them. By this, the President is able to secure their support for legislative measures. If President's party is a majority in the Congress, then he does not face much difficulty in getting certain laws of his choice passed. President can appeal to the people at large. It means the President can win public opinion for his policies and measures. He tries to win public opinion through speeches on the radio, television, weekly press conferences, that in practice, the election of President is direct. Therefore, it is easier for the President to gather opinion on his side. When the Congress knows that the public is with the President, it has to pass the laws wanted by him. Now, let's discuss the financial powers. In theory, it's the Congress which controls the public purse. In practice, the budget is prepared under the guidance and supervision of the President. Of course, Congress is at liberty to change the budget proposals, but it seldom makes any change. Now, coming to the judicial powers of the President. The President has the power to grant pardon and reprieve to all offenders against federal laws, except those who have impeached or those who have offended against the state. He also appoints, with the consent of the Senate, judges of the Supreme Court, which is the highest practical organ in the US. Now we will discuss how President of US is the leader of the party. The makers of the US Constitution had rejected the parliamentary system of the government, because it could not function without parties and political parties which, according to them, were not the need of the time. It means they were against the political parties. However, today, organized political parties and the president is the leader of his party. The moment a party selects its presidential candidate, he becomes its national leader. And if he succeeds in the election, then he becomes the president. He also becomes the leader of his party for the next 4 years. He, as the leader of the party, has a decisive voice in the selection of party candidates for numerous elective offices. He can exert great influence in decisions such as the distribution of party funds. As chief campaigner of his party, he may be more enthusiastic in support of some of the candidates and less in case of others. It's all the more important to note that the role of the president as a party leader is entirely extra-constitutional. Now we will discuss the comparison between the US president and the president of India. The American presidency is considered the most powerful executive office in the world. Due to his increasing powers and importance, he has become the focus of federal authority and the symbol of national unity. The US president is both head of the state and head of the government. Both the president of the US and the president of India are heads of state and mighty figures in their respective countries. Both have supreme command of defense force in their hands. Being heads of the state, they receive foreign chief executives. They receive diplomats accredited to them and appoint foreign ambassadors for foreign countries. This similarity is superficial. The President of India is the constitutional head of the state, and as such, he has practically no hand in the administration of the country. The President of India but does not govern, while the American President governs but does not reign. The President of India is nothing more than a constitutional or titular head of the state and government. American President has more power than the President of India. The US President has vast powers. Article 2 of the Constitution reads, "The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. He is the head of the state and government and runs the whole administration. But the President of India is only the head of the state and not the head of the government. In all his official functions, he acts on the advice of his ministers. It means the president has to do what ministers tell him to do. He is held, no doubt, in great esteem and still exercises the right to be informed, to encourage and to warn the ministers." Now coming to the position of the US president in relation to the cabinet. Now the position of the US president is superior to the President of India in relation to his cabinet. In the US, there is a cabinet, but its members are not equal to the president. They are not his colleagues. In fact, ministers are his subordinates. He is their boss. They are nominees of the president and they work during his pleasure. He is not bound to act according to their advice or even to consult them. On the other hand, the President of India is bound to act according to the advice of ministers who form de facto executive. He has no hand in the selection of his ministers, nor can he dismiss them. He can advise them, but cannot override the decision of the cabinet. The President of India is outside the cabinet and cannot participate in its proceedings. It is the Prime Minister who leads the cabinet. Now discussing the executive powers, how they differ in the executive powers. The US President exercises vast executive powers. He has the power of appointing a large number of officers with the consent of the Senate, and he enjoys absolute power in the removal of the officers. But the President of India has to exercise all his executive powers with the advice and the consent of his ministers. Now let's discuss legislative powers, how they differ in legislative powers. The US President has an important role to play in the field of legislation. He can send messages to either house or both in extraordinary session. He has suspensory and pocket veto powers. On the other hand, the President of India has no legislative powers. In reality, it is the cabinet which exercises all the executive powers in the name of president. Now coming to the judicial powers, that how the President of USA and India differs. The US President exercises judicial powers given to him by the Constitution. He has an important role to play in the appointment of judges, while the President of India exercises his judicial powers on the aid and advice of his ministers. What kind of party relations they share? The President of India has no party affiliations and renders significant impartial advice to the ministers. He can view problems from a national angle, much above the narrow partisan viewpoint. He gains experience while acting as an umpire in the game of politics being played by leaders of the ruling party and the opposition party. So this was all about the powers of the US President and the Indian President. Hope you're satisfied. Thank you.